Hi guys, it is Tiny Little Whispers ASMR, and today I have another true crime case for you guys, and this one is a historical case, and as you can tell, it is going to be soft spoken. I've had a lot of requests for a soft spoken video lately, so here you guys go. Before we get into today's video, I have another new video up on my second channel, and that is also up today as well, so that will be linked in the description box down below. The second and final thing, if you are new to this channel, it would truly help me out if you could like, subscribe, or comment on this video. We are so close to 15,000 subscribers, and once we get there, my husband and I will film an ASMR video together, just basically on how we met. So yeah, alright, let's get into today's case, and we are going to be discussing the Savannah axe murders. So this case takes place quite a few years ago in 1909. So around 3 p.m. on December the 10th in the year 1909, a man was walking on West Perry Street in Savannah, Georgia, and he heard some weird moaning noises coming out of the house number 401. This area of Savannah was right across the street from the rail yard, and it was not the safest part of town back then. There was always quite a bit of people in the area due to the rail yard being there, and it was one of the cheapest parts of town to live in or rent. The man, I'm not sure what his name was. I haven't seen it reported, but the unknown man climbed the porch of the home, which was known as the Gribble House. Upon reaching the porch, the man could still hear this moaning noise, and he saw that the front door appeared to be cracked. He opened the front door and immediately ran to phone the police. He had seen a woman inside, basically clinging on to life. She was the one that was making the moaning noises. When police arrived at the Gribble house, they found 2 women who were deceased and 1 woman who was critically injured. One of the women that they found who was deceased was named Eliza Gribble, and she was the owner of the home. Eliza was 70 years old, and she had moved to Savannah, Georgia from Cornwall, England, just before the Civil War had broken out. Eliza was married to a man named R. Gribble, and he had passed away at some point in time. I'm not sure if he passed away in the Civil War or at some point after. So Eliza was a widow at 70 years old. After Eliza's husband had passed, she decided to open up several rooms in their house to be boarding rooms, and this was how she had planned to basically make a living since her husband was no longer there to help out. Of course, like I said earlier, this part of town was not the safest, not the best, so Eliza did not charge a ton when she rented out her rooms. They were fairly cheap. While there, the police found the second deceased female, and her name was Carrie Hollander. Carrie was 36 years old at the time, and she was the daughter of Eliza Gribble. Carrie had recently moved back in with her mother after she divorced and left her husband back in Memphis, Tennessee. Of course, in the year 1909, divorce was not a common thing, so Carrie really had nowhere else to go except back home at that point in time. Carrie had moved back in with her mother, and they had worked together at the boarding house there and renting out their rooms. Carrie was born partially deaf, and she was only able to hear low noises, apparently, so honestly there was really no job opportunities for her back at that day and age, so moving in with her mother was the best and probably most practical option at that point in time. The police also found a third woman named Maggie Hunter. Maggie was the last woman they found and the only one who was still barely alive. Maggie was 34 years old at this time. Maggie had just separated from her husband, and his name was J.C. Hunter. And J.C. was 30 years older than Maggie. Maggie had rented a room the previous day to the murders, and she had rented a room for the whole month. She had her sewing machine delivered to the Gribble house, and she planned to start a seamstress business in order to support herself, since she was planning on divorcing J.C. The police scrambled to find a motive or a murderer for these killings, and they even managed to get an article in the newspaper the same night that the attacks had happened. In the article, the police claim they believed a man had entered the home with an axe found in the wood shed of the Gribble house. The suspect first went to the front door, where he attacked Maggie, who had opened the door. After that, he most likely attacked Eliza from behind, as she had no defensive wounds, and then struck Carrie with the axe as well. Carrie did have some defensive wounds on her, and they believe she was trying to protect her mother. The police claim that the women were attacked in this order. However, I don't know how I feel about that theory, and we'll discuss that more later on. The police also claim in the article that an eyewitness saw an African American man running away from the crime scene, so they began searching for a killer with that description right away. Maggie, like I said, survived the attack, so they took her to the hospital immediately. After the newspaper article was released, many people in Savannah took to the streets to find a killer. This basically started a massive riot, and fences and doors were knocked down. And due to the article claiming that the accused killer was an African American man, a mob of people basically rounded up around 150 African American men to be questioned at the police station. Thankfully, the police basically let all of these guys go, and they truly did not interrogate them, as they realized they most likely had nothing to do with the murder, and the mob and angry riots was just a bunch of people going insane because they were trying to find a killer and basically accusing innocent men. The police did do their due diligence, and I'm so thankful that they did, and did not just accuse someone right away. Of course, at the time, they are unable to use DNA evidence, so things were kind of stacked against them for ever finding the killer in this case. So while Maggie was in the hospital, she sadly ended up passing away. However, minutes before she passed away, Maggie was able to provide information to a reverend in relations to who had attacked her. While in the hospital, Maggie had a reverend named John S. Wilder, and the reverend had basically gone to talk to her and just see how she was doing. However, the Reverend John claims that right before Maggie succumbed to her wounds, she basically sat up in bed and was extremely coherent, and was acting like normal, and Maggie claimed her husband, JC, whom she had just separated from, was the man who had attacked everyone at the Gribble house. Right after that, Maggie sadly passed away, which seems a bit odd to me that she was in such bad shape when they found her. Then all of a sudden she was perfectly fine before suddenly passing. It's just a little weird, but you have to think we are looking at this case over 100 years after it occurred, and I'm sure reporting has been skewed a little bit at this point in time. Rev John was the only one who was with Maggie in her hospital room that day, and he told the police that JC had been the attacker. Maggie's husband, JC, had been born as David Taylor, but he had changed his name after being convicted of stealing horses quite a few years ago. David, now JC, was a 64-year-old man who had been wounded in the Civil War. He had lost an eye, and he even needed a cane to assist himself with walking. The police went to JC's home to do a quick search, and there they found a bloody rag stuffed in the fireplace of JC's home and a packet of bloody clothes. Like I said a minute ago, this was way before DNA testing was available, so the police just assumed that, these bloody rags and clothes were incriminating for JC, and they took him into custody. The police continued to look into other possible suspects, and they ended up indicting 3 men in total for the murder of all 3 women. One, of course, was JC, and another man was named Willie Walls. A third man was named W.H. Coleman. Willie Walls was the man who had paid for Maggie's stay at the Gribble house. While there was no evidence found of this, it was believed that Willie was most likely a new love interest of Maggie's. However, he was never sent to trial, as the evidence against him was severely lacking. Basically, he had just paid for her stay, and that was the only thing associating him with the Gribble house. The third man, W.H. Coleman, was a handyman in the area, and he had done a few odd jobs for Eliza Gribble. W.H. was questioned, and he was an extremely stand-up man, and the police believed his story. He basically had a complete alibi for the time the attacks took place. The police ended up letting W.H. Coleman go as well, because there was no evidence against him. The only man who ever stood trial for the murders was Maggie's husband, J.C. Hunter. JC claimed that he had nothing to do with the murders at all. On August 17th, in the year 1910, JC was convicted of murder, and he was sentenced to death by hanging. JC was set to be sentenced to death on December 22nd in the year 1911. JC tried to appeal his conviction several times, however, he was denied each time. Finally, one day before JC was set to be executed, the same Rev John who had visited Maggie in her hospital room visited JC to baptize him in his jail cell. JC told Rev John once again he was innocent and he had nothing to do with the attacks at the Cripple house. And Rev John was apparently so moved by his plea that he went to the governor and begged him to change JC's sentence. Of course, the Rev John had been against JC for quite some time, so the fact that the Rev John had changed his opinion moved the governor as well, and JC's sentence was changed to life in prison, and he was spared the death penalty. On October 27th, in the year 1923, JC was granted a pardon by the governor and was allowed to live freely in Savannah. So in my opinion, based on the evidence, I think that the murders happened in the opposite order. The police claim the axe-wielding man had come through the front door. However, I believe he had entered through the rear of the home, simply because Eliza had no defensive wounds on her, and she was sitting at the back of the house. She most likely had no idea what was happening. While Eliza was 70 years old, she was still able to hear, unlike her daughter Carrie, and so I believe Eliza would have heard both Maggie and Carrie being attacked and would have tried to do something or possibly fled the scene. After that, the police believed that Carrie had been assaulted, and she also had defensive wounds on her. She most likely had seen what had happened to her mother, and possibly, I believe Maggie was the third person attacked, and maybe she had just come back home and gotten the attacker off guard, as they did not realize that the Cripple house had a boarder at that point in time. I believe most likely Maggie was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm not sure that it was Maggie's husband, J.C., who would have been able to carry out this attack. He possibly could have, but that's asking a lot for a man who needed a cane to help himself walk and who is missing an eye. To be able to carry and swing an axe, I feel like he would have easily fallen down if he needed that cane for assistance, like I've seen in the newspaper articles. The bloody clothes do look really, really bad. However, I of course wasn't there, but during this time, they didn't have washing machines like we do today, and getting blood stains out of clothes is so difficult. So maybe he possibly had these clothes and just used them as dirty clothes. That's not to say he did not help in these crimes. I do believe that if JC is guilty, he most likely had some form of assistance. So yeah, I really am not sure what to think. If JC was involved with help, or if it was just a random attack of some sorts, or possibly someone who was looking for Carrie only as she had been the only one who was assaulted. I would love to know your thoughts on this case below. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day or evening.